The bright side of addiction is recovery. The field of addiction treatment is ever changing. There are many different modalities, different lengths of stay, inpatient, outpatient treatment, recovery homes, and so much more. There are good, ethical treatment programs in this country. And there are also, frankly, treatment programs that are more interested in filling beds and making money than successfully treating the disease of addiction. So how do you know where to send someone who needs treatment and whose life depends on it? Well, I always recommend that you find out if the treatment program that you are inquiring about is a member of NAATP, the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers, which has been around for nearly 50 years. They have a very stringent code of ethics, which translates into quality treatment. NAATP has well over 1,000 of the best treatment programs in America in their membership. They're active on Capitol Hill, leading the charge on public policy, representing the needs of those seeking treatment, as well as those in recovery. They have recently made some progressive changes in expanding and redefining membership, and they've established an exciting foundation for research, science, and education. Marvin Ventrell is the CEO of NAATP, and he's going to join us to talk about the new foundation, as well as the membership changes, the Addiction Industry Directory, which is available free to anyone, and some exciting details on the upcoming National Addiction Leadership Conference in Denver in December. We'll also hear firsthand about the outcome of successful treatment from Blair. Blair is in long-term recovery. She'll share her amazing story of long-term, ongoing personal recovery. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast. Following 15 years of nightly broadcasts on iHeartRadio in Seattle, we've now upgraded to a national podcast. It's available to anyone at any time, featuring interviews with clinicians, authors, recovering celebrities, newsmakers, and everyday people in recovery, plus vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends, and amazing stories of everyday recovery. We invite you to enjoy it and to share it with your friends as well. Recovery is as recovery does. We would love to hear from you, by the way. Feel free to be in touch with us via email. We would love to hear from you with your thoughts on the podcast and perhaps suggestions for future guests. Recovery Coast to Coast at Comcast.net. Recovery Coast to Coast is made possible by the good folks at Sundown M Ranch, one of the top treatment centers in America. They have successfully treated well over 200,000 adolescents, adults, and families for the past 50-plus years. And yes, they are members of NAATP. You can find them online at sundown.org. And while you're there, you can take a look-see at the treatment center itself and the beautiful grounds right at the mouth of the Yakima River. Simply go to sundown.org/gallery. The real beauty of Sundown is in the amazing staff who are all in on treatment. I mean, the patient really is the reason they are there. Admitting someone to an addiction treatment program can be very difficult and very emotional, very stressful. Their staff knows that. In fact, their staff will help you through the process with compassion, empathy, kindness, and concern. In fact, a great number of their staff have been where you are. They understand what the family is going through. They can help you navigate through the admission process, including the insurance coverage. They are real pros at that, and they do it with confidentiality, and they do it with respect. And in many cases, they can arrange for same-day admission. Treatment at Sundown is abstinence-based, 12-step centered. Now they provide detox, education, individual therapy, group therapy. They have exercise programs, chaplain services, a comprehensive family program, continuing care planning, recovery enhancement, an introduction to self-help, and an elders group, plus a pregnant and postpartum group. They even have a voluntary nicotine cessation group. I want you to check them out. You may not be interested right now. Maybe you don't know anybody who's interested in treatment at the moment. But if and when you need to find treatment for someone, please consider Sundown M Ranch. You can reach Sundown M Ranch at 1-800, toll free, obviously, 326-7444. Or just, again, go to sundown.org. You get all the information. If you want to check them out on the various social media platforms, you can find them on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter at Sundown M Ranch. And if you have any questions and you want to contact them by email, it's all confidential. It's info@sundown.org. The road to recovery begins at Sundown M Ranch. Let's begin the podcast with our conversation with Marvin Ventrell, CEO of NAATP, the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. Marv, how are you doing? How's your family, including the family of NAATP, which includes the family of many providers and members that have had to kind of slog through this pandemic?
Yeah, slog is right. Well, thank you, Neil, for having me again. I enjoy talking to you. I wish the news in terms of our addiction environment were better. You know, the twin healthcare emergencies of COVID and addiction have been devastating for people, and the outlook in terms of responding to these crises is really, really rough. We are resilient as a people, as a field, and I hate that we need to be so resilient right now. It's kind of almost an overused word, but folks are doing good work under the most difficult circumstances I've ever seen. In terms of the NAATP immediate family, the board and staff, we're all healthy and well. We felt a special obligation when COVID hit back in March of 2020 to respond to the field in a special way and be available and produce resources that were necessary to respond. And we were able to do that. We stayed strong. Two of us over that period of time on the staff had COVID. I was quite sick, as you know, and another staff member had a bit of an easier time of it. So we know what that looks like and feels like on a personal level. We're healthy now and working hard. And our membership has responded enthusiastically to the work. You know, one concern early on was that the field would be hurt so badly by their inability to provide care that first and most importantly, people would suffer because treatment wasn't available, but also ultimately the National Association that tries to hold it all together would suffer because we are our members. Without members, there's no NAATP. The outlook was precarious. It's horrible. You know, if you go back like 10 years, you know, we probably had national deaths from addiction in the 100 to 150,000 range, which is a crisis of the worst proportion. But the opioid overdose deaths alone annually are starting to approach those numbers. So this is bad. And you know, it's a healthcare crisis. The pandemic and the addiction crisis are the two national healthcare emergencies in this country, and they're these terrible twin healthcare emergencies that require every effort we can possibly put toward it.
Have we lost many programs during the pandemic?
Yes, but not very many NAATP members. We've seen a lot of closures and in the field at large, but among the NAATP population, almost none. What we have seen is some consolidation. So that continues. If there is a trend, a business operations trend in the field, Neil, it is definitely mergers, acquisitions, and field consolidation. So what's happening is behavioral health companies such as Summit, Pinnacle, Acadia, are acquiring smaller centers and increasing their scale. And sometimes those members are also NAATP members, so it doesn't work out very well for our bottom line. But if it produces care that is viable, then that's the main thing.
The other thing I wanted to ask you real quick was about digital treatment. I mean, the field is changing very rapidly, and a big part of it because of the pandemic. But we're seeing digital treatment. We're seeing a virtual environment. Is that being successful? Is there any research being done on that?
I think it is successful. I think that it's always a balance. You have folks on opposite ends of the spectrum who say it's the greatest thing ever. It's going to replace in-person care. That's not true. You have other folks saying this is terrible. It doesn't allow people the essential of being together in the room, and so it won't work. That's not true. It seems to be working really well for IOP, for example. In fact, this is all anecdotal information, but it's good anecdotal information. IOPs report consistently that individuals who came into care virtually do really, really well. That was the model they learned. That's how they started, and they're doing really, really well. Others who switched over, not as well, but still successful for virtual care.
And certainly a lot of young people are very used to this mode of communication.
Doesn't seem weird to them at all.
No.
And so, yeah, we're actually going to have a session at the conference called Telehealth and Virtual Reality Care, because it's not just, being on a screen together. There are all kinds of applications, the virtual reality piece, that are fascinating. University of Colorado Health Sciences people have a virtual reality behavioral health addiction component, and they're going to be speaking at the conference. So that's really, and it's like everything else. We have to figure out exactly what its parameters are and use it well.
Marv, did you lose many members last year because of the pandemic?
As it turns out, 2020 was the largest membership year in the history of NAATP. We ended the year with more members than ever, went over the 1,000 location mark. That's a pretty fascinating metric to me, that not only did folks not throw in the towel, they threw in greater participation in terms of being part of the national community, because it was pretty obvious we needed to be together and to have a collective strong voice and response in order to survive. And we have survived. And so it's still tough. And now with the variant rearing its ugly head, it's tough again. But here we are. We're not going anywhere. We've been through tough times before, and you just got to get up every day as a provider and as part of this community and fight the good fight.
Please give our listeners a brief overview. They may not be familiar with NAATP. I certainly am. I was there back when it was founded almost 50 years ago. But give us a snapshot of what it is, who it serves, and why it's important.
Sure. NAATP is a national professional membership association of treatment providers. So in the same way that other professions are served by a trade association or a professional society, whether it's doctors or lawyers or accountants or engineers, we serve that role for treatment providers. And that typically means facilities, institutions, places where individuals go for treatment. Many people think of as rehab. That's not my favorite word, by the way, but that's how folks think about it. Yeah, I'm not sure what it means. So we represent the interests of that group in several ways. One is public policy. We're in Washington and at state capitals advocating for policy and law that promotes treatment. We also provide resources ranging from every level of resource that a treatment provider might need to those providers, whether it's clinical, study information, operational, educational matters. We have monthly webinars, blogs, podcasts, our national conference and a resource center in order to provide those things. And we also provide, and this gets left out of the discussion sometimes, the function of convening a community. And it is essential to both recovery of an individual, that community be the condition of recovery, and it's essential for the survival and thriving of a field that it have a community that comes together and moves together. So I think of NAATP as providing that community link as well as the resources and political advocacy.
Well, NAATP certainly is not a treatment program, but it is, I believe, essential to treatment programs and to the field of addiction. Three things I want to talk to you about, Marv, today, because in the pandemic during 2020, things have been happening and happening rapidly behind the scenes. I want to ask you about the change in membership as you become more inclusive, opening your arms even wider to organizations in the field. And then I want to talk about your Foundation for Recovery Science and Education. And lastly, there's a big conference coming up in December. I want to get into that as well. So let's talk about the changes in membership, which is, again, more inclusive as you open the doors wider to more individuals, programs, organizations to ultimately help more people get well.
Right. Well, thank you. Those three things are great things to talk about. So first, in terms of the membership changes, as I said before, we're a membership association, so we are our members. So who are those members? Well, when NAATP was founded in 1978, it was a small group of what we think of as traditional 28-day Minnesota model treatment centers. And while a similar modeling of residential care is still an imperative component of recovery, while those are still core to our membership, the field has expanded dramatically in terms of what interventions are available to help people. And we need to represent that, what we call entire continuum of care, to be, first of all, representative of what's going on, but also to lead in terms of what needs to go on. And so our members range anywhere from harm reduction, early intervention, to residential care, to intensive outpatient care, to all manner of community services that are necessary for an individual to recover from this deadly disease. And so our doing this is a response to reality. At NAATP, we have to be aware of, sort of take the temperature of the field to know what's happening out there, but we also have to be smart and lead it. And so we see this change as broadening the tent so that, all comers are welcome. We need all the help we can get, and the entire continuum of care should be part of this discussion.
And recovery support services now included, supporter members, affiliate members. Again, you're opening up the doors to the entire field.
And I hope that that's how it's seen. To some extent, the doors were already open, but if folks don't know that, they're not going to come in the door. And we hadn't really defined some of it accurately or as well as we could. So there are essentially three levels of membership. The core are provider members, those who provide licensed and accredited addiction treatment. And those are the two pieces that are necessary. But there are also supporters, that is to say recovery support services, those kinds of services, for example, recovery that are so critical to recovery. And then the third category is affiliates. Now, one way to think of it is vendors, but not just any vendors. They are vendors who provide essential service to the treatment center as opposed to a supporter which provides support directly to the individual.
The thing that I like most about NAATP, one of the things anyway, is the code of ethics. This field is constantly under siege by charlatans out to make a buck. If you're a member of NAATP, you subscribe to a code of ethics.
You sure do. I mean, and so when I am articulating the entire membership requirement, I really have four P's for a provider. Licensed for all services you provide, everywhere you provide them. Accredited for all services you provide, wherever you provide them. Consistent with the NAATP ethics code, and you agree to be removed if you're in violation of that code. And then finally, consistent with NAATP core competencies of practice. So that last piece are the core competencies of good treatment center operation that are found in the NAATP treatment provider guidebook. And so what we've tried to do in a field that doesn't have as much regulation as other areas of medicine by far, that therefore allow less than honorable folks to operate programs, we have said the public needs to know where to come for reliable care. So if you're part of this tent that we've been talking about, you have strong indicia that providers you're looking at are both competent and ethical. And so when you search the NAATP directory, which is called the AID, the Addiction Industry Directory, and it's open to the public, I think it should be everyone's go-to in terms of finding good care. You will see that everybody in there has been vetted for those reasons. And there's no such thing like this in the country besides us.
Secondly, Marv, tell me about, and this is really exciting, the Foundation for Recovery Science and Education, which is as exciting as it is new.
Yes, thank you. Well, it's big. I call this our moonshot. So NAATP's been around for 42 years, and we've never done anything this big. We basically undertook about 6 years ago a process that would lead us to this point. At that time, we began a pilot program to determine whether we could study patient treatment outcomes on a broad scale never before done. So we would be looking at all kinds of patients from all areas of the country across different providers and different types of providers. So we did a pilot to see if that could be done. It's never been done. And the pilot confirmed that it could be done. And we produced a toolkit for doing that kind of research. And that then led to FORCE, the Foundation for Recovery Science and Education. So in 2020, literally launched, Neil, the same month COVID hit, in the most colossally difficult timing ever. And we had to look at whether we were going to pull the plug for a while or at least delay for a while. And we said, no, we can't kick the can down the road any longer in terms of figuring out on a large scale, as other areas of medicine have, what works for whom and under what circumstances. So the foundation was created as a separate not-for-profit 501c3 charitable foundation underneath the umbrella of NAATP to begin, as I say, the moonshot of collecting an amount and type of data never before collected so that we can once and for all show the efficacy of treatment in a way that provides the type of resources that will ultimately be necessary to better address this disease. So it's big, and we had to create a foundation in which to do it, and then a scientific protocol by which the information would be collected. And both of those things are in place. We have an early adopter data site count of 15 treatment programs, and some of that data are already coming into the pipeline here at NAATP. You know, we're dedicated to doing what's never been done before, which is really showing in a scientific way the efficacy of treatment.
And tell me about the Founders Campaign and how this is going to be funded.
Well, that's always the trick, is funding things. So NAATP's board of directors provided the startup money to build the foundation, but ultimately we determined that the foundation has to be self-supporting. It cannot rely on day-to-day NAATP operational funds to accomplish this. And so we engaged a task force, created the Founders Campaign with the initial goal this year in 2021 of raising $1.2 million to fund the work of the foundation. And as of today, we have hit the $850,000 mark toward the $1.2 million by the end of the year. Folks have stepped up all over the country to provide funding. It'll be an ongoing process always to fund FORCE, but it's been extremely successful, and we have to keep going. Treatment providers, foundations, individuals are coming forward, understanding the value of this foundation and contributing. And if any of your listeners are interested, I would sure want them to go to the NAATP website, www.naatp.org, and you can find the foundation and the donors campaign at that site.
The moonshot has been launched. That's exciting. Yeah. That's exciting, Marv. It really is.
Well, and it hasn't crashed at takeoff at all. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And it's so exciting. Dr. Annie Peters was hired to run the foundation. She's the executive director. And with my oversight, and Pete Thomas, our quality assurance officer, is key to this piece. The technology piece is really complicated and has now far surpassed my level of understanding, but we've got tech partners that are necessary to do all this, and it's really exciting.
The third thing I want to have you talk about is the upcoming conference, the The 2021 conference that was set earlier this year was torpedoed, of course, by COVID. It is rescheduled. It's going to be in December. It's going to be in Denver, and it's going to be fantastic. Talk a little bit about the highlights of the upcoming NAATP Leadership Conference.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, I just got off a Zoom meeting with my board of directors, and I said, and it's not hyperbole, I believe this will be the best conference that NAATP has ever had in terms of the convening and the substance. So it'll be our 42nd National Addiction Leadership Treatment Conference, and the title, you'll like this, Neil, it hasn't been released publicly yet, is called Conducting a Fearless and Thorough Inventory. So So taking the lead from what we ask our patients to do, which is an inventory to assess where an individual is. It's time the field said, let's take a hard and probably uncomfortable look at exactly who we are and what we do, and grow and become healthier as a result of that. So December 7th through 9 in Denver at the Sheraton. It's exciting in terms of the program and how we will address the issues of value-based care and similar topics. But it's also going to be really important because the family can come together again. And I use the term family, and I mean it. I really think that the NAATP community is a family, and we need to come together. That concept of convening is so important, and we have not come together since May of 2019 and the DC conference because of this COVID pandemic. So it'll be, folks are anxious to come together and see each other, and I'm just hopeful that the environmental conditions regarding the variant will be such that that's not a problem.
And again, if listeners are interested in going to this conference, there is a rate for non-members as well, I assume?
Yeah, it's a little higher for non-members. We definitely want to reward our members, but if you look at the conference historically, the attendance is primarily members, but a large group of non-members also come. That's usually how they learn about NAATP and ultimately become members.
Well, really exciting stuff going on at NAATP, and you are thriving in an environment that most people were terribly concerned about whether there would be a future. And not only is there a future, but there's a moonshot, and the future is as bright as it's ever been. And I like to say the bright side of addiction is recovery, and the bright side of addiction is indeed recovery. And for many, that recovery begins in ethically based quality treatment centers that are proud members of NAATP. If listeners want to find out more about this organization, go to NAATP.org. You can find out about the conference. You can find out about the Foundation for Recovery Science and Education, the membership changes. It is a very, very exciting organization, NAATP. And for those who are listening and maybe you know someone considering treatment, be sure the program is a member of NAATP. I always say that when people ask me, well, how do you find a good treatment program? And I said, begin by finding out if they're a member of NAATP. Marv, the organization continues to reach new heights, and I congratulate not only you, you're a big part of it, but the entire organization, the board of directors, the members. There is no limit to what you can do.
Well, it's a team, and we're all pulling in the same direction, and that's what's made us successful. I really appreciate those kind words, Neil.
I look forward to seeing you in December in Denver at the NAATP National Leadership Conference. Marv, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it as always, and I wish you continued success.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Coming up next, an audio archive visit with Blair, a grateful person in long-term recovery, sharing what it was like for her, what happened, and what it's like now. My co-host, Mike Hickey. Mike is an English professor and the author of a number of books, including A Dress Walked By with a Woman Inside, Counterclockwise, and most recently, Tell Me What You Want. Joining us is Blair N. Blair has been in recovery over 5 years. She grew up in Los Angeles and spent most of her life, or at least half of her life, here in Seattle. Blair, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell me a little bit about Blair and growing up and your life in L.A. and what brought you to Seattle.
Well, I was raised with two very loving parents, so that's my story. I don't attest to a dysfunctional home. I don't attribute that to where my addiction started to rear its ugly head.
Tell me about your family. I mean, do you have brothers and sisters? Or
I have one younger brother who comes off as the older brother, and I have two older half-sisters on my dad's side. They both live in California. They're quite polar opposites of each other, and I'd like to think I'm a little bit of both. They are about 15 and 18 years older than me and babysat me frequently when I was younger. My younger brother is my sun, moon, and stars, thanks to my story and my addiction. I definitely harmed that relationship. I've made amends, which was accepted as best as I could have asked for it to be accepted. But to sum it up, I'm not nearly as close with him as I'd like to be. He's extremely successful. He's a submarine engineer and sub-base banger and is one of the smartest guys that I know.
How'd you wind up here?
My parents decided that they thought the schools were better up in the Northwest. When I was about 6, they chose between Portland or Seattle, and we all drove up here together. And that's how I ended up here.
You remember that trip?
Bits and pieces.
Yeah. Nice. So you move up here, and when did the drinking and using start?
I would have to say my memory is very blurred, which I'm sure you're not surprised to hear, but my story starts when I'm around 7. The using and drinking starts around 14, 15, I would say. Easing into experimentation, feeling apart from my peers. I felt I decided that all the girls that were my same age didn't like me, and we didn't have much in common, and I did not feel accepted within their peer group. But the girls that were a couple years older than me, 2 to 3 years older than me, thought I was cute and dressed crazy, and so I was, they thought I was cute. They liked me. That's all that mattered, right? I was being liked, and I was shown attention, and I wasn't getting looked at out the side of their necks, so I started hanging out with them. And that's where that starts, because they were doing stuff. I don't know. I mean, everyone does stuff at different ages, but they were partying a little bit, and I smoked my first cigarette, and soon thereafter experimented with marijuana and alcohol. Not exactly in that order, in a general way. And that was it. Mike?
Well, Blair, I was curious when you were 14 and 15 and getting into the experimentation phase. Did your parents suspect that were you able to sort of hide it from them, conceal it from them?
I feel like they were pretty naive. I don't know if that's fair of me to say, but yeah, I hid it for a little while, and when they started sensing funny things happening, I would lie. And a lot of times my mom specifically would believe the lies. And looking back on it, she said she can laugh at it today. She's in recovery as well, and I'm very blessed to have that.
Your mom's in recovery?
She is.
Wow. How much time does she have?
She got sober about 2 years before I did.
Wow.
So she just celebrated 7.
Wow.
That's pretty amazing. So if I'm hearing you correctly, a lot of your early stages of experimentation were a very common desire to fit in. to fit in with your peer group with the
I
click?
would, I would say so.
Yeah.
And once I realized it made me feel different.
Mm-hmm.
That was it for me.
Off to the races.
Yeah.
Yeah. When did you start getting in trouble?
I was in trouble by the age of 16 and 17. Lots of theft, lots of acting out for attention. Really, really wanting to cover up my soft interior, which exists today.
Mm-hmm.
I put on a tough outside. I'm much more practiced at it today than I was back then.
So you got in some trouble along the way. Obviously, alcohol and drugs are involved in that. From that point on, up until the time that you found recovery, how bad did it get for Blair?
Bad enough. Short answer, obvious answer. I just want to say that anyone who's familiar with recovery, 12-step programs, they know about how the disease is progressive.
Mm-hmm.
So, where I ended up 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago, is very, very different from what happened when I started.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that I had extremely bad last 4 years of my using and drinking. It got really bad. My whole entire life revolved around it. I couldn't be in relationships, friendships, relationships. I mean, I was in them, but I could not respect them. I could not show up as the friend that I believe, a friend that you can depend on, a good friend, a really good employee. I pride myself in my work ethic, and that was completely gone. I never stopped lying.
Anybody call you on it?
In the end, my best friend did call me on it. I could no longer lie to her. And, I'm sure she wasn't the only one, but she's the one that comes up in my mind first when you ask me that.
Can you remember the specific anecdote? Do you remember when your friend said, listen, we need to talk? Can you share that?
Absolutely. There was a definite difference from my friend and her sister, who they're my family today. We used to sit on the couch and we'd use together, but she didn't participate and drink and use opiates the way that I did. It's not that she was squeaky clean and sober square, but she knew I was gradually getting more and more into harder drugs.
What was your primary drug, Blair?
Well, it all started like you've heard before with marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
But my primary drug of choice was Oxycontin and everything in its family, all things opiates.
Okay.
And, it was my last house on the block was intravenous drug use, that I never made it down the end of that street. I literally was very, very close to doing that. But back to the situation where she called me out. We were at her apartment and I lied to them and I said, I just need to run to the store. Really weird, really random. And I had planned to meet my dealer 2 blocks away, and I did. I went back to their house and she asked me if I was high. I obviously looked it, acted like it. It's very, very easy to spot, especially for a fellow addict. And I lied right out of my mouth. I said no. She, right away. And
what did she say?
I don't really remember verbatim, but she probably just let it go, but knew in her heart and mind that
she knew, and you knew that she knew.
Yeah, but there's so much in between.
Yeah.
My heart, my mind, and the actual reality. I'm lying to my best friend on this earth because there's only one thing that matters when you're in the grips of active addiction and alcoholism. Everything, they talk about it in the book, They say that frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. And I needed it took me a couple years for other people to define what that meant. But what it means for anyone that doesn't know, and I thought it was absolute gibberish when I first read it, it means that you'll sell your kids' Christmas presents under the tree.
Whatever.
To get your next one. Steal from your mother, which I'm ashamed to say that I did. You know, you'll do absolutely everything and anything to get what you need.
So your friend called you out. During that time, what about your relationship with your family, with your mom and dad?
My dad has lived in California with his wife, my stepmother, who I love and adore. And my mom lives off the north end of Bainbridge Island. So I wasn't seeing my mom often.
Did she know what was going on?
She knew what was going on. It was a event that took place in November of 2009.
Tell me about it.
Well, I was obviously invited to my aunt and uncle, my cousin's wedding, and half my family lives on the East Coast and the other half on the West Coast. And so it was my East Coast family, fancy, uppity. I probably shouldn't have said that.
Uppity is okay.
My cousin's wedding, and we obviously had all, mom, brother, and me had been invited, but we weren't able to all go. So I went because I am loved despite who I am, and I was given the opportunity to take the trip. Of course I couldn't go empty-handed. Of course
Where was the wedding?
The wedding took place in Connecticut.
On the East Coast.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, so like a good addict and alcoholic, but addict primarily, I made sure I had everything with me. Enough pills to sustain me through the weekend. So I showed up there. Rehearsal dinner was the first night. And, you know, I proceeded to get embarrassing at the first night at the rehearsal dinner. I couldn't even keep it to a couple glasses of wine. Couldn't even wait to get back to my hotel room by myself to get blotto. So they definitely were keeping an eye on me, saying, already knowing, I think, that I was going down the wrong path, but, you know, okay. And really what matters to them is appearances. So I was a threat to that perfect sort of appearance.
What happened?
Of their family. What happened is that, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie 28 Days with Sandra Bullock, where she falls into the wedding cake. What happened is everything except for that kind of. It just makes me think of that, so I always paint that as the picture, so you guys get it.
Yeah.
Whoever the lucky person I'm telling this story to. I made a fool of myself in front of my family, and I passed out in a golf cart after the wedding. Need I say more? I mean, I can remember it. I can remember crawling around the golf course community the day after losing my cell phone. And I mean, just, you know, this is what happens.
Was that the bottom for you, Blair, or did you have to go down further?
It took 6 more months. But I would like to finish the story, if I may.
Sure.
So they patted me on the head and got me to the airport. And I remember my aunt telling me, you need help. You know, like pitying me, but not being real, you know, just I didn't get the impression, because I was so far from reality, what was about to happen. And what happened was, while I was on the plane trip back, she emailed my mother and said, I am no longer interested in having any contact with your daughter. Come to think of it, with you. So my mom got swept into this because she had a history, and so did my other aunt, of alcoholism, but my mom had nothing to do with this. So I got home, my mom contacted me, and this was when my mom found out that I was into hard drugs. It's all out there now. And that was November. I always like to say my higher power chose my sober date. I did not know my last drink and my last drug was my last. So it took me from November to the beginning of April, hit bottom, sufficient to get where I am today.
Were there people along the way who tried to help you?
Absolutely. I started going to meetings about a year and a half, that's an estimate, year and a half before I got sober.
Really?
So I would use and drink. I would wake up the next morning absolutely miserable, wanting to die. And I would make that resolution. It talks about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that I wasn't going to do that again. And I would walk to the nearest meeting. And it would be 6:30 in the morning. And I would walk there. I'd introduce myself as an alcoholic. And I would say, I'm not sober. Or sometimes I would say, I have 2 days. And even when I said that, it wasn't solid because I was on that marijuana maintenance program that we talk about. But I kept showing up to that meeting, and I got my first 24-hour coin at that meeting, and I'll never forget the man that gave it to me. And I don't know where he is now. I saw him at meetings for a while, but he'll be forever in my heart. And so when they say keep coming back, I thought it was the dumbest, cheesiest thing on the wall when I got here, but that's the one that worked for me. I always do my best to tell the new person to come back, whether they use and drink or not. Come back, because it will mess up what you're trying to. It'll mess up your drunk.
Yeah.
If you keep going to meet.
We are going to take a short 30-second break from our story. We'll continue right after this.
She has always been your baby, but when your daughter got into drugs and alcohol, she turned into a stranger. What do you do? Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown's nationally recognized youth treatment program guides young people back to a life free of drugs and alcohol. All treatment is gender specific and directed by caring certified professionals in a safe environment. You can get your daughter back and get to know her again. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
Thank you for listening to that message and supporting our sponsor as we continue on Recovery Coast to Coast. Blair, she is originally from Los Angeles, lived here a long time now, however. She has 5.5 years in recovery. And joining us in the studio is my good friend Mike Hickey, another guy in long-term recovery. And we're talking to Blair. We talked about what it was like for her and the struggles that she had and some of the challenges, some of the embarrassing moments that highlighted her active addiction. Now we start talking about the good stuff, the recovery stuff, and how it all happened. Even though she was going to meetings for a year and a half, she was certainly not very close to recovery. She was going to the meetings, but that was about it. Blair, what made the difference? What happened, especially on April 11th, 2010, to change your life?
All I can remember to illustrate, like, the first day, I did have a prayer life. I did believe in something. I did not call it by anything, but I believe there was something out there. And I remember just kneeling on my bed, being done. The night before. What I remember is the night before, which I wish I knew for a fact, was it was just an absolute disaster. There's really absolutely nothing worse for an addict or alcoholic than the substance not working anymore. It is absolutely demoralizing.
You tried to use more and more to capture the feeling?
It just wouldn't work. My life was in shambles. I had lost my full-time job. I had to take sick leave from my part-time job. I had broken my parents' heart. My brother had no respect or desire to be close to me because of the way that I lived my life. My best friend told me that she was going to have to emotionally cut me off because I was going to die in my sleep. And so I had been told at meetings, after I said, well, I still have a job. I still have a place to live. I still got, I'm okay.
I still got stuff.
I got stuff. I mean, and my friends there would say, eventually they would say, you're not going to have any more of that. and it's going to happen soon. So I woke up that day and I just decided that I would have to accept help. I'm probably called my mom first. She arranged to come over immediately and drive me to the recovery centers of King County, RCKC, to go to detox for 6 days. And I'm grateful and have no idea why, but that was my last day using.
Do you remember much about those 6 days in detox?
Well, I was drugged out of my mind to wean me off the amount of opiates that was in my system to avoid withdrawals. I slept most of it. I remember meeting someone, though, who came to be my favorite friend. We ended up at the same treatment center. She was there. She was going through the same thing as me. And, you know, but when you get clean and sober, you notice things that you never noticed before. And those are little moments and little gifts that you're given that oftentimes outweigh the times where you're just barely holding on by a thread. And that was one of them.
Mike?
You shared with me one time, and I would love it if you would share with the audience a little bit about when you were a young girl and you had this sort of vulnerability, and you would sit in the corner of the playground, kind of isolated and alone and alienated from the rest of the group. And share with what your mom said about that.
Okay. Yeah, this little story has a special importance because it was the first time that Mike approached me and said he could relate to this story, and we've been friends ever since. So now when I think about it, I think of him, and I'm really grateful to have him in my life. He showed me encouragement and support ever since the first meeting we went to together. So thank you, Mike. I just always felt apart from, you hear people like me say that. It's like a common thread. So I used to kind of hover in the corner outside the crowd of kids playing together and not understanding why no one wanted to play with me. And I think I illustrated this to my mom one day, and she said, Blair, you're going to have to go to them. They're not going to come to you. You're going to have to go say hi to them and play with them. You're going to have to go out and get things, and you're going to have to initiate, take action. This is what I get from it now, not her words, and make things happen. She also informed me somewhere around that time in my life that I was needed to be my own best friend, and it broke my heart because the way I was wired was dependence on other people, and if they liked me or not, that was a barometer for how I was doing.
And it kind of seems for you and for other people who are afflicted with any chemical or behavioral addiction that little girl is still in there. It's not like sobriety recovery has expunged it completely from your psyche, right? But now you've got ways of dealing with it.
I know that she is still in there, and I have some pictures of her up by my bed because I'm really fond of her. It's the other one that I really struggle with. I'm not crazy about, just to be honest. There's even been times in recovery where I've loathed her more than I loathed her before I got sober, which is kind of might come to a surprise. But we hit bottoms in recovery. Not just in using and drinking, and but the bottom line is I don't use and I don't drink, one day at a time.
And you go to meetings.
I go to meetings.
And you work a program. And you read the book.
I am currently working the 12th step. I couldn't be happier about it. It's changed my life.
I mean, Neil, this reminds me of what you've said on the air so many times, that there is nothing that happens in life that you can't make worse by going out and using and drinking. There's nothing in the world.
Absolutely.
Life is 10% of the stuff that happens to you and 90% of the way you react to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when you went through treatment, went through detox, and then was it outpatient or was it inpatient?
Inpatient. I went to Thunderbird Treatment Center, which is basically Skyway,
Yep.
Renton area in Seattle. And
Was that 30 days or more?
it was 28,
Mm-hmm.
and it took me about 3 weeks to realize that it wasn't a popularity contest.
Mm-hmm.
And the opportunity that I had been put in my lap. It was what you put into it, you got out of it. You know, I had a wonderful counselor in there. She's in recovery She's been in recovery for over 20 years and has a place in my heart forever. And you know, I left and I was shaky and had absolutely no idea what I was going to do with myself. So I did what they said, and I went to a meeting that same day I got out, and I got placed in a quote unquote clean and sober house.
Oh.
In the
You say
middle of-
quote and unquote.
Yes.
There's a story there.
There is. I essentially locked myself in my room when I was there. Drunk guys knocking on my door. People that were just still using in there, you know? Then it is what it is. I'm not talking down. It was good for me, and it was also a miracle I stayed clean and sober there, but I didn't hang around my clean and sober house. You know, I was there so I had a place to stay. I was building a foundation of people that I knew, women primarily, that I knew in recovery. So I would go to meetings, and after about 2 months, because I loved to work, I got a job. And so I went to work. I went to meetings immediately after work, and I'd get home safely by the grace of something better than me. That was I stayed there, I think, approximately 4 months.
What about a sponsor?
I'm trying to remember. I got my first sponsor either before I went to treatment or right after treatment, and she changed my life. She's extremely religious, and I'm extremely not. So it was with her that the term God grew on me. But she wasn't pushy about her religion. Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual program. It's not a religious program. We opened the book and we worked together, and I didn't get into what we call the action steps with her, but she got me into the book, and we were probably together about 6 months before I decided to get another sponsor that I just felt was more available. But we've continued to be friends. I call her mom. She gave me her 5-year necklace when I turned 5 years last April. I've had her come to meetings that I've secretaried to chair, and she's absolutely an angel in my life.
My co-host is Mike Hickey. Mike?
Well, you know, Blair, you talked a little bit about finding a sponsor and how important that was in your recovery journey. On the flip side of that, have you ever had any sponsees? And if you have, talk a little bit about that experience, if you would.
I was probably, first of all, I completed the 12 steps before I was instructed that I could have sponsees. That is my experience. Everything that I say on this show is my experience and no finger wagging. So that's how I was taught from my sponsor at the time. I would get asked to sponsor, and I would absolutely say yes and get excited about it. And that was about my second year of recovery, and I was very much a different woman than I am today. Don't know how to set boundaries, extremely codependent, not understanding that this is out of my sponsor's mouth. My job as a sponsor is to guide another alcoholic through the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's where the 12 steps are, and everything else is a bonus. It's not my job to be their mom, their best friend, their ATM.
Their bail bondsman.
I didn't get that, you know, and I'm just so desperate to be liked that I didn't know how. And, you know, it's like my first inventory I ever took, you know, I didn't do it right. And to anyone who's experiencing that, That's the way it is, I think, for all of us.
You told me that your mom has been in recovery about 2.5 years longer than you. What role did she play, if any, in your going into the rooms and in your sustained recovery?
My mom is so fantastic. I'm so proud of her and proud to be her daughter. I really wish I could remember this more clearly, but I believe that she took me to my first meeting.
Oh.
I go to meetings. I've been sitting in meetings with more people that don't have present, supportive parents. They might not, they don't even know their parents, let alone have a friendship and a healthy relationship. And how about, like, what I get with my mom is, like, she's a fellow alcoholic. So we get to joke about people who take a sip of their glass of wine and put it back on the table. And we're absolutely baffled by this. If you're an alcoholic, you will sit there across the table from someone and obsess about why they're not finishing their drink. So there's just little gifts like that. We go to meetings together. She lives not far in grand scheme of things, not far from me, but about, I would say, probably maybe once a month we might hit a meeting together. But, our relationship is better than it could have ever been. She made amends to my family. I made amends to my family. I couldn't have been dealt a better hand.
I've got to ask you, did you make amends to the family in Connecticut at the wedding?
Absolutely.
How did that go?
But had you asked me my first 6 months of sobriety if I was going to do that, absolutely
not.
Absolutely, I'm keeping my mouth clean on this interview. Absolutely not. I wasn't willing. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The day I got back from the trip, did I want to make amends when I was still using? Yes. I was devastated, but it takes time. If you have a part of your story, a person in your life who you're absolutely burnt up at that you actually harmed, but you're mad at them and you can't ever imagine making amends to, if you stick around and work the steps with a sponsor, you're going to be amazed as to how that might change.
How did they take it?
I wrote them, I did it via email. I said at the end, it would mean a lot to me if you just contacted me regardless of how you receive this. Contact me to let me know you received it. And they acknowledged it. And I believe that they said thank you. And that was it.
That's enough.
That's enough. And I'll just share that if there's one thing that's all over my inventory every single time, every single person, place, or thing I'm resentful at, it's expectations. So I told myself I didn't have expectations of how they were going to respond. That was a lie. But bottom line is that they received it, and I cleaned my side of the street to the best of my ability.
And you can move on.
And I've moved on.
Mike?
Because expectations are premeditated resentments, right?
And one of my sponsors, their resentments waiting to happen, at least for us.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask this question, and I'm going to beat Neil to the punch because I know he's going to ask this question. If there's still people out there suffering from chemical behavioral addiction, what would be your advice to them?
Well, don't be discouraged. If you know at the bottom, in the depths of you that you don't want to do this anymore, I think what I did and what a lot of us do by just going to meetings, whether you're sober or not, that plants the seed. It's a hard question for me to answer just because every alcoholic and addict is different. And it's a crapshoot because some of us get it before we kill ourselves and some of us don't. So the bottom that's sufficient to bring about a personality change, a spiritual experience, whatever you want to call it, is different for every addict. So the keep coming back thing, it sounds cheesy, but it's what worked for me.
How difficult was it for you in that first year to keep coming back?
I made it a habit to go to meetings. I mean, there were times, obviously, when I was beside myself, but I was carried. I was carried by something I can't describe because it is beyond me how I stayed that way. My life I was pretty miserable. Up until about 10 months, and my life drastically changed in the form of a person. And also, I just want to say that year 1 to 2 was absolutely the best time in my recovery. Maybe with the exception of recently.
Why?
Because I met somebody that showed me what it was like, what no matter what actually meant. You know, the phrase gets thrown around, but if I may explain, I heard someone share the other night about what it means, and you've got two different things that are separate, and the thing that we do when we're addicts and alcoholics is we mix the two. So on this side, there's life. On this side, it's your recovery or your sobriety, or hopefully both. And whatever happens over here in life does not affect your sobriety. They're completely separate. So if something happens over here, it doesn't touch anything over here. And that was described to me in a meeting, and I just think it's an excellent metaphor.
Recovery first.
Recovery first.
What about now? What is life like for Blair today in recovery?
Today, I wake up not afraid to wake up. That is amazing for me. There was a time in my sobriety when I was. So and that time, thankfully, I mean, I can't put into words what that means to me. I have a dependable job that I love it's just the most amazing work environment I've ever worked in. And there are times when they have to ask me to leave because I don't, not recently, but I don't want to go to my outside life because of things that are going on. But I have found the busier that I stay and the more involved in the program and service in more than one form, the better I am. I recently was blessed with more than one sponsee, the most sponsees I've ever had in my recovery, I've gotten the opportunity to get as far as open the book with. And no matter how I'm feeling, I wake up with a purpose. No matter how I'm feeling about myself, these women depend on me in some form. And it's all I ever wanted was to be depended on, honestly. So I go to work, I do my very best, like by default. That's just something that I'm very grateful to my work ethic. I go to about 5 meetings a week. If I go 3 days without a meeting, just for this alcoholic, I start to know what's going to happen. My disease is very much alive and well. It's just arrested when I'm working with other alcoholics and going to meetings. But it wants me dead. It wants me dead. So I just have practice I'm starting to practice the real tools that are described and given to us in the program. I'm getting to know myself. I'm hanging out with myself for the first time ever. And it's been something else, I'll tell you that much. And I try to do creative things and do art, and I'm working on doing other things just other than just work and meetings, but balance. But I would just want to say to anyone who's early in recovery, if you have the opportunity to just do recovery and meetings or trying to acquire recovery, there's nothing wrong with that.
Blair has been joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast, talking about what it was like for her, what happened, and what it's like now. I thank you and wish you continued love and recovery one day at a time.
Thank you so much.
Mike, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Neil.
Well, we're going to wrap up this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast with an inspirational reflection from a man who knows all about long-term recovery, actor Dick Van Dyke.
When major unforeseen events occur in our lives, we sometimes have difficulty accepting them. Even though the change may very well improve our lot in life, we're convinced that only dark days lie ahead. An unexpected job transfer, for example, forces us to move from a coastal location to a city far inland. We dread the thought of making new friends and changing our lifestyle. Perhaps a treasured relationship ends abruptly, leaving us devastated. Anyone can be completely thrown by such occurrences, including those of us who pride ourselves on adaptability and acceptance. We turn our eyes upwards and ask beseechingly, why is this happening? Yet somehow, with the help of family, friends, and a loving God, we get through these ordeals a day at a time. Things gradually work out for us and for those around us. After a time, our lives change in ways we couldn't have planned or even imagined. When we first faced the changes, we had been deeply upset. It seemed that life would never be the same. After a while, chances are we've become grateful for the way things have turned out. Thought for today: nothing is permanent except change.
Well, that wraps up edition number 1512 of the National Podcast Recovery Coast to Coast. Special thanks to Marvin Ventrell, CEO of NAATP, the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers, and Blair, celebrating long-term recovery with gratitude and amazing grace. Now, if you've enjoyed this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, the National Podcast, well, we'd love to hear from you. First of all, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. Secondly, send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And third, feel free to write a review of our ongoing podcast. That makes a big difference. And lastly, kindly tell one or two of your friends about our podcast, and that really helps us carry the message. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the National Podcast. And if you know someone who is experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here's a 24-hour national helpline that offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals are available on the hotline as well. It's 1-800-622-4357. That's 1-800-622-HELP. And if you're interested in finding out more about Alcoholics Anonymous, you can check out their website, aa.org. And another shout out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, successfully treating individuals, including adolescents and their families, for well over 50 years. Sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.